Have you ever heard a silence so heavy, it felt like hunger itself was speaking? It was early morning when the frail voice of a little girl broke that silence, whispering, "Mama, will we eat today?" Her mother gently touched her cheek, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We are fasting today, my love, fasting makes us stronger." But the truth was painfully different, there was simply no food. In a small, worn-out house at the end of the street, a mother was teaching her daughter patience, when in reality, she was teaching her how to survive despair with dignity. Hunger wasn't just in their kitchen, it was in their bones, in their prayers, in the silence that filled their nights. Her name was Amina, a widow who once had dreams, routines, and a warm kitchen full of spices and laughter. But life had slowly stolen those pieces, one hardship at a time. She stitched clothes for neighbors, but payments came late, and food disappeared quickly. The month had stretched too long, and this morning, all she had was water. She wrapped her scarf tighter, took a breath, and whispered another prayer that somehow, somewhere, help would arrive. Her little girl, Noor, didn't understand why her stomach hurt so much, but she understood her mother's softness. She didn't cry, except today. Their neighbor, an elderly man named Farid, heard the faint cry through the cracked window. He paused, listening. He had always seen the little girl smiling at the stray cats in the street, her laughter like tiny bells. Today, that laughter was replaced by hunger. He quietly approached the window, and what he heard next froze him. Amina's trembling voice reciting a prayer, asking for strength, not food. For dignity, not pity. That touched his heart in a way he had never felt before. Meanwhile, inside, Amina continued calming her child. She told her stories of people who fasted not just for faith, but for gratitude. She spoke of patience, of strength, of hope. But her voice cracked when she saw her daughter's eyes, full of trust, full of pain. She turned away so Noor wouldn't see her tears. Mothers can endure hunger, but not their child's hunger. That afternoon, Amina prepared 2 cups of water and pretended it was soup. Noor looked at the water and then at her mother's face. She didn't speak. But children have a strange kind of wisdom. They can see what adults try to hide. Noor quietly drank her soup, and then hugged her mother. In that moment, the hug spoke louder than any words could. It said, "I understand." Outside, Farid stood quietly at her door, holding 2 bags of groceries he bought with his small savings. He knocked gently. Amina hesitated, wiping her tears, fixing her scarf, trying to look composed. When she opened the door, she saw Farid smiling softly, his eyes kind. He didn't ask if she needed help. He didn't offer pity. He simply said, "I brought extra food today. Maybe Noor can help me carry it." It wasn't charity, it was respect. Amina's eyes filled with tears, not of shame, but of relief. For the first time in days, she felt seen, not judged. Noor rushed to the door, her little hands touching the bags with wide-eyed wonder. The silence of hunger had finally been broken, not by words, but by compassion. And sometimes, compassion is louder than any cry. By the next morning, life had not suddenly changed, but something had shifted. Hope had quietly walked into their home. Amina, still humble and reserved, carefully unpacked the food bags. Rice, lentils, bread, milk, even a small pack of cookies. She gently placed the cookies aside, saving them for something special. Noor, curious as always, asked, "Mama, are we still fasting?" Amina smiled, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Today, we are giving thanks." Farid didn't stop with one visit. Each day, he found a reason to knock at their door. Sometimes it was because he'd accidentally cooked too much, sometimes he bought extra groceries by mistake, and once, he even asked Noor to help him bake bread, even though he already knew the recipe by heart. He didn't just bring food, he brought warmth. He brought back laughter. He brought back dignity disguised as friendship. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, Farid and Amina sat outside, watching Noor chase the neighbor's kittens. Amina finally asked, "Why did you help us?" Farid stared at the ground for a moment, then softly said, "Because hunger is not just the absence of food. It is the absence of care. And no one, especially a child, should face either." Days turned into weeks. Amina got more stitching work, and Farid helped her connect with a tailor in the market who needed skilled hands. Noor's laughter returned, bright, joyful, loud. She even began inviting stray cats to sit in their courtyard, feeding them crumbs of bread and pieces of biscuit. Sometimes, it looked like the cats understood her happiness. But the most beautiful change wasn't in their kitchen, or in their clothes, it was in their hearts. Amina no longer said, "We have nothing." Instead, she began to say, "We have enough, and soon, we will have more." She didn't mean just food. She meant strength. She meant faith. She meant community. One morning, Noor woke up excited. It was her birthday. Amina had saved the small pack of cookies Farid had bought weeks ago, and together, mother and daughter decorated them with smiles made of sugar. Farid knocked, holding a small handmade doll. Noor's eyes sparkled. She didn't just receive a gift, she received love. That night, after Noor fell asleep, Amina whispered a prayer, not for help this time, but for the chance to help others the way she had been helped. That's when she realized, hunger had been replaced with purpose. And sometimes, purpose feeds the soul more than food ever could. Years later, some people in the neighborhood would speak about the little girl who once asked if water was soup. They would talk about how that girl grew up to open a small community kitchen, a place where rice, bread, and kindness were always served together. Noor's kitchen, they called it. Amina stood beside her daughter on opening day, tears in her eyes, pride in her heart. Farid, old now and walking slowly, stepped inside, smiling like he always did, softly, gently, with that same compassion that once knocked on a lonely door. Noor hugged him and said, "This started because you listened to a child's hunger." Farid shook his head and replied, "No, my child. It started because your mother didn't let hunger break her. She turned it into strength." That kitchen wasn't just a place to eat. It was a place where no one had to say, "We are fasting because there is no food." It was where mothers found comfort, children found joy, and strangers became family. Sometimes, people came not just because they were hungry, but because they needed to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. Amina would often sit quietly near the window, watching children eat, laugh, and sometimes cry, just the way Noor once did. Every time she heard a child whisper, "Mama, I'm hungry," she remembered the silence that had once lived in her own home. And she knew, this wasn't just a kitchen. It was her answer to that silence. Word spread. People from nearby streets, and then other towns, visited the little kitchen that fed not only stomachs but hearts. Some offered donations, some offered help, and some simply offered listening ears. That was the magic. Once compassion starts, it doesn't stay in one place. It travels. It multiplies. It grows. One evening, Noor held an event where people shared their stories of hardship and hope. When it was Amina's turn, she stood in front of the small crowd and simply said, "I once told my daughter that we were fasting to be stronger. But the truth is, strength didn't come from fasting. It came from kindness." Silence fell across the room. Not the silence of hunger, but the silence of understanding. The kind that connects hearts without saying a word. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere, in another home, another little girl whispers, "Mama, will we eat today?" And maybe, someone nearby hears. And maybe, that's where the next story begins.